Good evening. Welcome, everyone. If I can get my panelists up here, okay. I'm Darcy Alexander. I'm the chief curator, the acting director, the senior deputy director. I don't know who I am today. I am introducing some of my favorite people. I do know that. Okay, so this panel discussion is in conjunction with the Chloé, the so-called Chloé exhibition, Mood of the Moment, Gaby Aghion and the House of Chloé. And we're very delighted to welcome you to this lecture, which is funded by the Gertrude and David Fogelson Lecture Series. So thank you to Ellen and family. Tonight's program is part of a dialogue and discourse series. The focus is making an exhibition. And it features key members of the team responsible for this exhibition and bringing it and realizing it at the Jewish Museum. First and foremost, it's Claudia Gould's project. Many of you, everybody knows who Claudia Gould is. She's sitting right here in the front. She was the amazing director of the Jewish Museum. She did many great things, including hire me at the institution, but this was really her brainchild. She grabbed a hold of this idea a number of years ago, and it's so you, Claudia. This show has all of the elegance and your incredible sense of style and perfectionism, and you brought together this amazing team who will also be with you on the stage, and that includes Elliot Barnes, who is sitting right to your left. Why don't you guys come up as I'm introducing you, please? Okay, please close the extraneous noise from the galleries. And Elliot did this amazing design for the exhibition. One of the fun things about having these kinds of jobs is you can see these ideas and these designs take shape. But when you go into the galleries, you see these ruffled, undulating backdrops that disguise the old inner lining of the mansion rooms. You're obviously in an old the Warburg house. And it's completely transformed. The elegance and the texture, Elliot, of your designs just accentuates the beauty of the garments themselves. Also, Choghakate Kazarian, wave your hand, please. Our incredible curator. Choghakate is an Armenian-born French curator and an art historian who's now based in New York. She was formerly curator at the Musée d'Art Moderne de Paris and has curated exhibitions on such artists as Lucio Fontana, Piero Manzoni, Carol Appel, and Henry Darger, with many accompanying exhibitions, lectures. She's a great, deeply knowledgeable about post-war and contemporary art. I also want to acknowledge Christina Parsons, who is in our audience. Christina, I don't have my glasses on. Please raise your hand. There you are in the back. Christina played a very critical role. She's the Jewish Museum's assistant curator, and she worked closely with the team creating this extraordinary installation. Thank you, Christina, and to everybody who's involved in realizing this show. Over the next few months, I just want to note before we start, there are going to be a number of related talks and performances and workshops coordinated with this exhibition, and please go to our website for further details. Lastly, I want to acknowledge all of our members who came to the preview exhibition today and who are joining us this evening. Your support makes our work possible. Now, please take a moment to silence your cell phones, if you haven't already, and join me in welcoming this wonderful team to the stage.
So, can everyone hear me? Where do we begin? Someone's phone? Or is that like chirping? Anyway, where do we begin? This show was conceptualized, I would say, in 2020, in February of 2020, when the world was easy and sprite and bright. And it was February 14th in Houston. A friend of mine, Dennis Friedman, whose exhibition was on view of his collection, we were having dinner at the Museum of Fine Arts Houston in celebration of that. And he said, you know, I'm working for Chloé right now as a consultant. And he says, and did you know the woman who started Chloé, Gaby Aghion, is an Egyptian Jew? And she began Chloé in the 50s, and she moved from Egypt in 1945. I said, I had no idea. I said, this is a perfect perfect show for us. As a matter of fact, probably at dinner, I was probably texting Darcy, I have our next clothing show, and she was like, yippee, because we were looking for one, but it's not that easy. So fast forward, he made, Dennis Friedman made a presentation to Chloé about who we are and what we do here at the museum, and they were very enthusiastic, but March came and went, and we didn't begin it because no one could travel to France, and Darcy and I started putting together the team of the people that could work on the show, and the original curator had since then departed us and moved on to another exhibition, another museum, and so we were trying to think of curators to put together theoretically, because none of us were really doing much of anything, if you know what I mean. We were all moving exhibitions around and trying to figure out when we were opening and things like that. So we remembered that we had met Choghakate. I met her at a dinner party a number of years ago, and I said, what about Choghakate? And Darcy said, I was just thinking of her. She would be perfect. Now, perfect in that she is a modernist. She understands mid-century art, but this is not an art show. This is a design show. But I said, any good curator can have the sensibility, and they can feel that. They understand it, and it doesn't matter. They can translate what they see at the time to what was happening in the world culturally. And as you know, clothing is part of our cultural fabric of how we live and move in the world. So with that in place, I thought, wow, it's also interesting that Choghakate is an Armenian who moved to Paris when she was 8, is that right?
Yes,
With her
that's
family.
correct.
And so she was an outsider like Gaby looking in. And then a dear old friend of mine, not old, but a dear friend of mine, Elliot Barnes, who I've known since 1989, when I worked on my first clothing show at the Wexner Center in Columbus, Ohio. And we had hired Andre Putman, the very legendary grande dame of interior design, of black and white, notably. And we invited her to do the installation at the Wexner Center of this exhibition on In Black and White Clothing. And her associate at the time, or her young, I don't know, architect, what would you call it, an associate architect? Associate. So Elliot shows up as an American coming to represent Andre, and we met in 88, 89, and the show opened in 91. So fast forward, I thought Elliot would be perfect, an American in Paris, an outsider looking in, who's lived in Paris for the last 35 years.
35 years, right.
35 years, so he's perfect. So we put together the team, and then from there, I am going to kind of pass it over to Choghakate, and to, as I teed this up, to see how she began the process of trying to articulate what she wanted to do and say, all around Gaby as the nucleus. And this is, for us, or at the museum, it was, for me, a part of a trilogy of visionary women. The first being Helena Rubinstein, that we did an exhibition of, what was it, 2012 maybe, 13? And it was showing her collection, Helena Rubinstein's collection, and everyone knows everyone in this room, I'm sure, knows who Helena Rubinstein is. Not everyone knows who Helena Rubinstein is, but, and an extraordinary entrepreneur. And then a number of years later, we did a very similar show on Edith Halpert in the Downtown Gallery, and a very important woman who started a gallery in 1929 on 13th Street and showed all the American modernists. Basically, it's the Whitney Museum would not have existed if there wasn't this work. And I was always looking for like this third part of who, and Gaby is perfect. She fits the role, but not all the designers, if any of them, are Jewish, except for Stella McCartney. As we all know, her mother was from the Kodak family, and Eastman Kodak. And,
Linda
Linda Eastman, and from the Rochester area, right? No, it's not true, Darcy? It's a different family. Oh, I actually thought it was that family. No, it's a different family. But Okay, well, thank you for that. We just assumed it was Eastman. Okay, but different family, different noble family from wealthy family from New York who is not that Eastman. Anyway, but all the designers are mostly British, except for Karl Lagerfeld and a few smattering of others. But it's really about Gaby and her vision and how she put this forward, and actually 71 or 2 years later, how this brand is still thriving and changing and morphing with today's values of sustainability, and it's how important it is more than ever. So I'm going to hand this over to Choghakate and her beginnings on how she thought about putting this together.
Claudia, for this beautiful introduction. The first time Claudia and Darcy told me about this project and invited me to curate the show, well, first of all, I was very flattered because the Jewish Museum is an iconic, highly respected museum, and any curator has so much admiration for its program. It's always exciting, elegant, glamorous. So that was my first impression, and I must say also I highly admire Claudia, and obviously if she wants something and asks you something, you can only say yes for multiple reasons. Well, you know that. Well, we all know that, and you know if she has an idea, it will be exciting, and she will bring you into an extraordinary adventure. And as any scholar, I was very curious for what is it, because when they told me about Chloé, this is the image that came to my mind immediately from 20 years ago, because I grew up with these images in magazines and advertisement, and with these girls running wild in the Tuileries Garden, and this ad campaign by the photographers Enos and Vinod. And since at that time I was a student at the École du Louvre, which is literally situated in the Louvre Museum, I was having lunch every day in the Tuileries Garden, so it meant a lot to me. But beyond that, I wondered what was Chloé, and I had no idea that it went back to 1952, because for me Chloé was a very young and recent brand. So this is how, at the end of 2021, Claudia and I were in Paris to spend a week in the Chloé archive. As many fashion houses, Chloé has created a heritage department where they start keeping their own creations, but also try to source in different places among collectors or online to try to find their pieces. And it was an extraordinary archive created 12 years ago, very understudied. And in a certain way, I believe that's because Chloé, we never know who that is. We don't know, it's not the name of a designer, it's not the name of the founder, so it was a mystery. So we went through the archive, looked to the clothes and all the materials that was created around Gaby Aghion, who has been interviewed for hours by the archive at the end of her life. So the idea was to take Gaby as the starting and the end point of the exhibition and to pull that string. And her idea of creating really this idea of women dressing women and adapting to the desires of other women, and creating this style that is very effortless, accessible, and that you can wear every day. So that's why, as you've seen the show, it was the starting point. And my wish was also to find the appropriate way to show these garments, because this was not haute couture, this was not strictly tailored clothes. They were all very simple, very elegant, like envelopes, very light. So I wanted to find a new way to show these garments that had nothing to do with the high glamour and glitters of the Met show or the Brooklyn Museum's Dior show, but to find a language that corresponded to the idea of the brand, this effortlessness that is so Parisian. And I was inspired by that, by this concept of the sprezzatura, which goes back to 16th century Italian author Baldassare Castiglione, who defined sprezzatura as the art of concealing the efforts, so to shine even more by looking effortless. And I thought this is the concept that really embodies the Parisian elegance that is never uptight, never too polished, never sleek, but has that bohemian style. And visually, I was inspired by our visit in the Chloé archive when the archivists were pulling these garments on a hanger, and I thought, this is it. This is how these garments should be shown in their storage state. And I was inspired by this by the artist Franz Erhard Walter, who is known for these performances using different types of fabrics and garments. But when these pieces are not shown in performances, but as an installation in a museum, as you can see here in this photo at the Dia Beacon, he calls this work in their storage form. So this is what they are. They're not worn by real people in a museum, but in their storage form. Hence the idea to display them on garments to keep that lightness. And here also are the dresses that were folded over the hangers as if in a closet, which is also an interesting way to show garments because you can see the label, which was something very dear to Gaby Aghion, because when she started her brand, it was very unusual to keep the label because the stores would just cut them and replace them by the retailer's name. And Gaby said, no, if you want my clothes, you keep the label Chloé on. So that's how it all started, and came in Elliot.
So let me just ask you how Gaby came up with the name Chloé, because it's not her name.
So many people, when Claudia and I interviewed the designer who were at Chloé, I remember we talked to Claire White-Keller, and she said when she came to Chloé, she was intrigued by who is and what is Chloé. And actually, it's very specific to this brand that it's not the name of the designer, but more the potential client. Gaby decided to not use her name because she said that her husband's family was so wealthy and it was not well seen for a woman of her status to be working. She couldn't use the name of her maiden name because she said, oh, if I failed, I don't want to put my family to shame. Because everybody bet on her. Everybody said, oh, it's just a whim. She will stop in 2 weeks. And she couldn't use her own first name because she said it sounded like a fortune teller. So she decided to borrow the name of a friend, Chloé, because she said she loved that name, and also because the roundness of the letters Chloé was very feminine to her, and she wanted to convey that soft femininity to her brand.
But there's just one other thing that I always think is very striking is that women were only got the right to vote in France in 1945, which is shocking to me, but maybe I shouldn't be that shocked, and that they certainly could not own a business. So that's why she had a male partner who started the business with her. And I think they couldn't write checks, I think not until the mid-60s.
Right, not until the mid-60s.
Yeah.
She was very surprised because she came from a very progressive Egypt, and she thought, oh my God, they're less progressive in Paris. And also not well-dressed, that's what she said, because she grew up with French magazines, and she fancied French fashion. But when she came to Paris, she said basically the women who could afford couture was well-dressed, but the others, they just had copies of couture. So she found that niche and these needs to create her own brand. And speaking of soft power, I would like to introduce Elliot Barnes. I would like to read your bio.
Oh, my bio.
Very serious. Because Elliot didn't start it last week. I mean, he has done a couple of things, just a few.
Older.
Okay, he doesn't look, but he's much, much older. I'll stay polite. Okay, so among the few things that Elliot has done, so he has a master's in architecture and urban planning from Cornell University. In 1986, the AIA member architect began his career with Arthur Erickson Architects in Los Angeles. Can you believe he left Los Angeles for Paris? Anyway.
Very easy choice. Really.
I love Paris, but usually people go the other way. And at the same time, pursued an academic career teaching at renowned universities in the US and at NSAD, which is the National School of Decorative Arts in Paris. Very fancy. In 1987, he joined the office of renowned designer André Putman, so he's used to visionary and powerful women, who in 1997 handed over the design management of her firm to him, a position he occupied until 2003. In 2004, Elliot Barnes created his own interior design firm in Paris. As his work shows, his obsession with detail that characterizes his style, which is both eclectic and demure, which was perfect for us and for Chloé. As we will see tonight, the Elliot Barnes style resides in his elegant handling of light and use of both unusual and novel materials, which invest unique, exclusive spaces with an innovative approach to luxury. Okay. Yes, I told you. He has done a lot.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. When did we have our first discussion about Chloé, Claudia?
I don't even know what year it is or where we are
It was-
or anything, so I can't even begin
But
to
you had
tell
been with Choghakate in Paris already, and you had looked at it,
Yeah, and then
right?
I actually came back to Darcy and I said, I think I found somebody
Right.
to, I think I know somebody who would be appropriate for the show, and he's someone I've known for 30-something years.
Okay.
And yeah.
So we started talking about it.
Yeah,
and
I
then-
think we
yeah.
talked, and we had dinner, I took you
Yeah.
to dinner, and I said, would this be of interest to you? And you said, well, I haven't done anything like that but 35 years ago with Andre, and.
Maybe that's a good thing.
And I think you said, maybe that's a good thing. I said, it's a good thing.
It's a good thing.
This is not,
Yeah.
doing installations and in museums is,
No. And I think kind of the first thought after I had spoken with Claudia and then spoken with Choghakate was to understand that any and everything that I really needed to do to design this show was really present within the Chloé brand and within the life and times of Gaby Aghion. So I started with this sort of very sort of random association process of doing sketches in my office in Paris, and the idea was, the overall idea is to say that as a stylist will dress a model with fabric while creating a garment, then I will dress the Jewish Museum to create the installation for the show of Gaby Aghion and Chloé. So that sort of very large, all-encompassing conceptual idea gave us the initial impulse for the show. And then as you look more and more into the work of and the garments of Chloé, you see that there's this really high level of fluidity and curves and softness and motion. And I wanted to bring that as much as possible into the design of the show. So one of the next sketches, the smaller one, is this where we take a plan and then we take a piece of thread, and I put the piece of thread on the plan, and it's inspired by the dress that is designed by Karl Lagerfeld. You can see at the bottom of the dress, there are all these sort of little curves, and so that becomes the vocabulary for designing the walls. And thank you for not having a heart attack, the two of you, when I showed you this sketch. Saying this would be
Yes,
the
we're
plan.
not used to, because most of the time we're used to have this fancy architectural, software programs.
Yeah,
Just
yeah, this is
and
all
Elliot
hand.
came up very old school with hand-painted, handcrafted
Right, because
drawings.
the best garments are made by hand. So we try to dive into the entire spirit of how garments are made. And so the next idea was then to how to make these curves. So I was thinking about fabric, and we were talking a lot about fabric. But doing fabric as a support for garments that are made out of fabric never really sounded correct. Never really
We didn't
sounded
want
right.
to compete with the garments.
Somehow you're
Yeah.
competing. The textile will compete with the textile. So one day we were visiting the Chloé archives, the three of us, and I saw that they were storing their garments in bags made of a material called Tyvek, which is produced by DuPont, and it's a very interesting material. It's a paper, a fibrous paper. It is 100% recyclable, 100% sustainable. It doesn't give off any acid odors or molecules, and it's really, let's say, garment friendly. So I said, let's do the walls, let's make the structure of the show with Tyvek.
Which
And-
is also a utilitarian material, and I like the idea because we didn't want it to compete with the garment, so it was there to serve the garment.
To serve the garment. And
really.
also what's interesting about Tyvek, and a lot of architects know this, is that today, and you can walk around the city of New York, and you will see Tyvek being used to insulate buildings, create vapor barriers between the inside and the outside. So for me, I thought it was a sort of very cute little wink to my training and my initial profession, which is architecture.
And also you made visible a material that is usually not visible.
Right.
It's just utilitarian, yeah.
And so all of these things that are really present in the conservation of garments became really sort of vocabulary, then hence the language for the show.
But easier said than done.
Easier said than done. So we encounter many, many problems of fire rating and
There's a structure,
how
an
do we make this?
infrastructure.
How do we hold it up? And so we finally agreed upon a hard structure Tyvek, which is very resistant, but then is also very flat. So to give it, again, some volume, what I thought was that I would fold the paper over and make what I call a bouclé. So we make sort of very round forms, and you assemble those one by one. And what happens is that when you do that, and then you look back at some of the garments from Chloé, you can see at the bottom edge of the garments this sort of curve and this sort of, not a ruffle, but this sort of undulating movement. And that, in fact, is really the architecture of the show. So all of the language and vocabulary that you see is not invented. It's really extracted from the brand and from the designers itself, from the clothes themselves.
I wanted to add something, because I've been coming here for all the installation. So all the folds you see on the wall, they all correspond to individual rolls of Tyvek that you can see. I don't know, we had like thousands of them. So
Yeah.
this was one of the room of the show has been turned into sort of Tyvek workshop.
There's 20,000 square feet of Tyvek used
And
for the show.
so Elliot sent them a sort of code, like a Morse code, because he wanted to alternate small folds and large folds to give that relief
Right.
to
So
the
it's not flat,
surface.
it's really moving.
So they had to combine small rolls for the small folds and the larger one and just combine them. So it was a sort of mathematical game, like a Tetris game or something like that. And they had this little machine, and they were just cutting rolls and rolls and rolls and
For
rolls.
days and days
Yeah,
and days.
I think we all had a Tyvek
And then all of a
overdose.
sudden it started crimping.
Right. Because paper crimps.
Yeah, because paper crimps, and then it was like, I just was like. can't have
Nonstop.
It was, this cannot crimp because it's gonna mess up everything, and then they figured out how to, I don't know, I think it was Choghakate, I was on the phone with Elliot one night or morning, and I said, we can't have this crimping, it looks terrible, and she was like, oh, but the clothes will be over it, you won't see it, and I said, it's so not true, you're gonna see this, and then Elliot came up with another defense on how to stop, to alleviate the crimping
Right.
to a certain point that it's not, would not
Overwhelming,
interfere. It would not overwhelm. So there's, so much about doing installations is trial and error.
And it's a lot
And-
of sort of on-site adjustments, really up to the last moment where you're really adapting and finding solutions. Right?
And there was also the technicalities, because there are many different versions of Tyvek, and we had to test it. So was it garment, first it had to be garments friendly, but also
Fire rated.
fire. And so there were a long, long series of testing that we went through. And another episode of how we always consider a lot of options was the wall color.
The wall color.
Many people think it's just white, but
It's not white.
I don't know how many shades of white
Well,
we
in
have.
reality, I think there are
It
100,000
exists.
shades of
Oh, yeah,
white.
there's me. There's me arguing at a restaurant with Elliot. This was
About
our-
what
it was
shade?
our-
It was a heated discussion. It was not.
It was a heated discussion on what color milk we were actually going to
Right.
use, and from what animal or human was this milk going to be coming from, and what color. And it was just like, and it's Choghakate, at one point I was like, I don't want my picture taken, and I'm like this with Elliot, like, oh my, like.
I know, remember.
And she was very stubborn on the color.
Of
And
course.
Elliot and I were more on the same page, so I don't know, we really should have been arguing with her.
But you
about it.
started with milk. You came back, at that time, you just came back from Paris, and
No, I came back from Italy, and
you said it's
everything-
milk. Chloe blouse is milk color.
Yeah.
But
Well,
what,
everything is milk. If you look at the online, and if you're going to look at Chloe, and they give you a color, they said it's milk, and I said, okay, it's milk, and then
There's all kinds of milk.
there's all kinds
There
of
are all
milk.
kinds-
From which animal is the milk?
or
And-
how fat
Yeah,
it is.
And it was pretty hilarious, and I'm sending Elliot pictures in Puglia of my white purse that I had just bought, leather purse, against the, what was it, the beautiful
disagreed on
sand
what
of
milk
someplace.
was.
I don't know, it was beautiful sand and the white sand and the relationship to, so while it looks very, oh, let's just choose this color, it was not
It's
that.
very research. It's very.
We had
it's
like
very
so
thought
many Zoom meetings to decide what color we should choose, and we had several samples sent. Elliot sent us 5 samples of white shades with such fancy names as marshmallow white, coconut
That was
milk
not really
white.
marshmallow white, right?
When we came to see it, I said, okay, I shouldn't look at the names because they're so fancy. I will be attracted to the name instead of the
Yeah.
color. And on the right, these are the two white finalists. So
I don't know which one we chose.
On the Tyvek. So, I mean, I also want to jump into a little bit about the nuances. The hanger nuances. Now, these hangers look like they hung in your closet, but I can guarantee you that these are very
Oh my God.
expensive hangers,
Design.
and they're actually much larger than the ones that hang in your closet. And what color the white is, but also about that very après-garde, joie de vivre feeling of, you may notice in the blouse room, if you have a keen eye, that some of the ties on the blouses are not ironed out. And this is very intentional. That's as if you've come home from an evening and just, well, you untie your blouse and then the next day you put the blouse on, but it's still crimped. And of course you need to do the bow just as it actually was there, because if not, you'd have to iron it. And we all know that. I mean, many of us know that. And then that was Choghakate's very nuanced approach to it, as being very relaxed. And
sprezzatura.
yeah, and I felt like we can't have them all wrinkled because it can't look like all of us have just woken up.
Some of them have
And
been
have it.
steamed.
I said, you know, you have to steam some of this. I said,
We
please,
did.
leave one or two. And then, you know, I even had one of our staff members said, you know, I really love this show, but I don't understand why you would take that incredible Phoebe Philo dress and throw it over a hanger. And I said, you noticed. And I said, well, when you can have a blow-up of it, that who could be better than these women, these gorgeous, tall women running in the Tuileries? I said, we wanted to show is that when you do come home and you throw it over a hanger because your cat's not going to jump on the chair or crawl up it if it's hanging low on the floor, or a dog or whatever, that you really can't put a gown in the closet like that anyway. So it always has to be draped over a hanger so it doesn't get mauled by the whatever's on, you know, on the floor.
We
So
have a
I said-
connoisseur of fashion here.
and I feel like it was really is the mood of the moment in every different way. And those, for me, are the actual special, nuanced, and I would say they're highly intellectual. In a very non-intellectual way, but very nuanced and intellectual, in that you understand how a woman thinks, you understand how she dresses, and how she moves in the world. And I think those are very special, just special to me.
Little details.
Yeah,
Thank you.
details. I
Details,
just wanted
very
to
important.
say that.
Speaking of blouses, so the idea was really to conclude the show by circling back to Gaby Aghion and the way she was dressed, because very early on in her life she adopted that uniform with a blouse in sandy colors and a black skirt. And I was very inspired by the way she spoke of her native Egypt, and she said that her colors are the colors of the Egyptian sand, which is the most beautiful sand in the world, which feels like silk and has that very beautiful pinkish beige color. So I decided to bring this iconic staple of Chloé, which is this blouse, very feminine, very bohemian spirited, and to have this immersive installation with more than 50 blouses from all the designers of Chloé, and the way they kind of took that staple and made it their own from 1960 until now. Many of them in silk, but also cotton with embroideries and different shades from milky whites to brown. And so we asked Elliot to come up with an idea to create this finale and to have that immersive impression while still using very simple and not spectacular garments.
So here the idea is that at the end of this show, when we have all the 50 blouses, is to have them almost flying. So they're really to talk about the lightness of the garment, the transparency of the garment. So they're suspended on hooks off the wall. Some of them are on stands. Some of them are actually on little hooks coming off the podiums. But there's an incredible lightness to this room. And I think, Choghakate, it's also important to talk about the fact that Chloé never does a wedding dress
Yes.
at the end of their défilé. So at the end of the fashion show, they never do the wedding dress, which is what you normally do in couture and even in prêt-à-porter. And so this becomes, in a way, the white room with the floating blouses, and it's our sort of little wink to the wedding dress at the end of a défilé.
Yes, I remember when I first presented this idea, and Claudia said, "Oh, that's the finale of a runway show. This is the wedding dress." And And Elliot came up with this idea of creating a circular room to really have that feeling of being immersed in it.
And again, fluidity and moving around and no straight lines.
And being very surrounded by all these colors.
And just today, when I saw that photo, I said, my goodness, that's a keyhole. You created a keyhole. And I didn't even notice it.
I didn't notice it
With a
either.
little marshmallow button in the middle. So,
And I think just to go back a bit to the idea of white, I think the idea of white in the show is super important because we have so many different garments of so many different designs, so many different colors, so many different details, that if you add a color, whatever color that might be, it's going to sound false at some point in the experience. So we really have to stand back and really have the installation as a support. It's sort of an absence of presence, if you will. It's there, but it's not overtaking the show. It really gives space to the garments that have been chosen.
And also because, as you know, for conservation reasons, for any textile exhibitions, we cannot have bright light as we would like to, but very dim light, especially for these garments that are made of hand-painted silk. So we knew that the light will be so low. And so the idea was to find that perfect shade of white that could reflect the light and bring some luminosity and lightness to the exhibition.
any questions?
Comments?
Are we?
Yeah, we could take some questions. I'll come over there.
Thank you very much. You seem to have studied Gaby in like great detail, so I'm curious for all of you, what's 1 to 3 words that really come to your mind when you think about her spirit and what she represented?
I would say 3 words. My first word is Alexandria, because that's where she was born, and she was fond of the beaches and the sand in Alexandria. My second word will be Paris, because she said that when she was asked at the end of her life, who is the Chloé girl, she said it's not a blonde or a brunette, but she's a Parisienne. My third word to define her will be Saint-Germain-des-Prés, because she embodies this spirit of the Rive Gauche, this kind of bourgeois bohème spirit. You're next.
Joie de vie.
Oh, true.
3 words.
You're cheating. Okay, well, that was smart, so that's
So
your
I'm going to not follow the rules, and I'm going to use a word in France from France called culot. And culot is daring. It's the idea that you will dare to be different. You will go and not care about what people think. And Gaby Aghion is the clear embodiment of that when you think about what she was doing in the late 50s and then in the early 60s. So culot.
Actually, we said more words than you asked for.
Culot, yes, it's C-U-L-O-T. C-U-L-O-T.
I have a less intellectual question. What is Tyvek?
Tyvek. So Tyvek is a fibrous paper made by DuPont, and it's part of their program to find a technical support for insulation, for clothing, for packaging that is 100% recyclable, and in the process of making the paper, it covers all of the sustainability requirements that are in action today.
And, I mean, we know, Tyvek comes in the mail. The
FedEx
FedEx packages are Tyvek. And so it's that same
It's that same
material, and we've made, dresses have been made out of it, but there's many different levels. And
Many
we've
different thicknesses
And
and
we have
structures.
found out all the different kinds of Tyvek there are. And
We
Kind of
became
now.
Tyvek
Yes,
experts with the show.
yeah, so,
But it's very museum material typical. We wrap artworks in Tyvek for shipping them.
It's very resistant. It's resistant to water. It's resistant to humidity, to dirt, and then it's very lightweight as well.
You cannot tear it also. That's one of the reasons it's used for wrapping artworks.
Depends on the structure.
well, the Tyvek that you get in the mail, the FedEx is modeled like that and very thin and paper-like, but this is not.
There are different types of
Different
Tyvek.
types of Tyvek.
Some feels more like a fabric, some feel more like paper.
I have a question, but before, can you spell that fabric, Tyvek?
Tyvek, so it's Tyvek.
T-Y-V?
V as in Victor.
E-K.
E-K.
Tyvek, never
And
heard of that.
as Elliot said, if you look at buildings under construction,
It says Tyvek.
in
and
New
that's not
York,
right.
everywhere, it says Tyvek. It's used for insulation as well.
Okay.
So it's actually more places than you think.
It's really kind of everywhere. Even
Yeah.
bracelets, if you go to the doctor, the bracelets,
Oh, yeah,
that's a
true,
Tyvek
that's
band.
Tyvek.
You
yeah.
cannot tear
It's-
them.
It's,
At the
it's
hospital,
at the hospitals,
it's Tyvek.
It's Tyvek.
Okay.
The shoes that the doctors wear, that's Tyvek.
You have it everywhere, but you don't see it. That's the trick.
Initially, I read that the intention of the company was to present a practical, everyday type of dress with a sports-like type of dress. But the collection we saw seemed to be more formal for the upper class, not for the everyday type of person. Can you comment on that, please?
That's a very interesting question. So there are two things in terms of accessibility. There's the easiness of the dress to be worn on a daily basis, and then there's financial accessibility. So in terms of prices, they varied over time. As you know, now because it's very sustainable, a lot of things are handmade, so it's it's quite expensive. It varied over time, but as a brand that was on the highest end of ready-to-wear, the prices have more or less always been quite close to couture. That's for sure. In terms of style, we have the best example here, one of the few early examples, please, of Chloé. This is the first Chloé success. This was a dress designed in 1960 by Maxime de la Falaise and Gaby Aghion in collaboration. So this is exactly what you mean. Very inspired by sportswear, very easy to wear. You have room to move and comfortable.
I found this on the Real for $300 with Choghakate's help, one night at 2 in the morning.
Yes, we were trying to see how certain pieces in the show would feel actually when being worn. We want you to have that first-hand experience. So each of us found online one piece of the show. So getting back to that, about the dresses you see here. So obviously, as a curator, when you make a selection, I wanted to have the highlights of each designer. What is a highlight? Obviously, pieces that look beautiful, interesting visually, or historically meaningful, but also my selection was also guided by what looks good in the museum context, because there were so many things like low-rise jeans or low-rise pants that look amazing on a real person, but in the context of the museum have nothing to say or not much. They look uninteresting visually if they're deprived of the real body and movement. That's another criteria. For me, it was important to show some pieces that were interesting in that context. So that's why obviously you have some pieces that are a little bit more extravagant than others. I'm sure they have done a lot of black sweaters, but they were not interesting in this context. And the reason I did this blouse room was also that, because as a curator, obviously we always tend to choose the exceptional pieces rather than the everyday white t-shirt. But the blouse was also a way to show that kind of more underrated and simple and less spectacular piece that's also part of Chloé.
I mean, I think I would, sort of to your point, it was the first ready-to-wear brand. So that's extremely important. I know that they credit Yves Saint Laurent for that, but actually she was.
He came later.
This is in 52, and it was a high-end ready-to-wear brand. So we're not talking about a Gap sort of situation. It is a high-end ready-to-wear brand, and it always was. And if and they never had a couture line. Whereas all the shops, Chanel, Dior, Yves Saint Laurent, they all had couture lines. Never. So I think that's one is the point. And yes, to Choghakate's point is that of course we were looking for the more spectacular, garments, and if we just pulled out things that are everyday
And more specific to
I mean,
Chloé.
it has to draw an audience. Then, like, why am I coming to this museum show? when in fact I can just see this in my own closet. So, and some of you may have these wonderful pieces in your own closet.
I mean, we do
Like
have, we
I
do
do,
have.
you know, but,
I don't, but, you know.
Soon. Be patient.
So I noticed that Stella McCartney came to Chloe at age 25. I'm curious how she engaged with this designer at such a young age.
Oh, for me, when I've looked at the history of Chloe, as I always say, there was a before and after Stella. For me, she's the pivotal moment in the history of Chloe. I think the first part one of Chloe is really embodied by Carl. He's the main character, by far. There were many great designers, but he's the central figure. Then there was Stella. Really, she paved the way for this new generation of young British women designers. And because she brought with her Phoebe Philo as her assistant, who took over, and we all know how influential Phoebe became over time, and it's still considered as one of the most influential. For me, Stella was important. Obviously, when she came in, everybody said, oh, she's the daughter of a Beatle. And she, of course, she had absolutely no experience except an internship at Savile Row. So nobody believed in her. And still today, it's a very, very bold move to hire a 25-year-old fashion graduate.
After Karl Lagerfeld, he expected somebody at his level. You know, I mean, and they hire a 25-year-old,
The exact
unknown,
opposite.
but famous, you know, father to take over. I mean, I think he was horrified. He was shocked and
He made unkind public statement about her, yeah.
you know, insulted that this was it. But she rose to the occasion, and you know, her
Nobody
work-
believed in it. They expected her to fail, but it was a
and
huge
her
success.
work, it is. It's when I first became looking at Chloe, and because she was such a the work was such a sensation. And if you see the work in the show, from the T-shirts and actually her third runway show where she outed Bill Clinton.
She rejuvenated Chloe.
And she rejuvenated. It was really for created the Chloe girl.
And brought a much younger spirit also to the
And
brand.
a younger buyer to Chloe. And it's, all those bags and everything, people were going crazy. Chloe bags, this, that, and the other. My staff gave me a beautiful Paddington bag when I left. Also
Designed by
from
Phoebe
Rio,
Philo.
You know,
And considered as the first It bag.
the first It bag.
I remember those. Everybody
Yeah,
had it.
unaffordable. But now on the Real Real,
This is not sponsored by The Real Real or Tyvek. No.
Promoting the real now.
Next time we should invite someone from The Real Real and Tyvek.
I'm promoting Chloe. But seriously, it's
There's an approachability to disclose, yeah.
Well, okay, maybe we'll take those two last questions, and I want to save time so people can see the exhibition quickly.
Thanks, Jenna. Hi, there's such a thing in the business as hanger appeal on clothing. So I don't know if that influenced part of your wanting to show them on hangers. And also, I think they're Phoebe Philo dresses, the chiffon dresses that are folded over hangers. Was there a practical consideration, like with a sweater, you want to fold it, you don't want to hang it?
So there was an aesthetic consideration to that. I didn't want anything stiff that conveys a sort of artificial body. And also because these clothes, most of them are not tailored, but they correspond to the technique of flou, which is draping and supposed to float on the body. And as I was saying earlier, I wanted to show them as archival garments or also very casual way as in a closet. But there are three pieces, as you noticed, that are different than other hangers. They're folded over because I was looking at these garments that are just this kind of, they're like whipped cream. They're just a mass of vapors, but tons of fabric, these chiffon dresses. And so for the photo shoot, for the book, we photographed them on a light box table. They looked amazing, but we couldn't do it in the exhibition. So I thought of just showing them on hanger as the rest, but discussing with the Chloé archive, they said you cannot do that because those straps are too thin to be able to support all that weight because you have a lot of fabric, you know, on the bottom. You have to show them on a dress form. But as you can see in the photo above the garments, all you see on the top, they just have these straps. It shows a lot of skin, but in a museum, all you would see is this sort of wooden, stiff mannequin, and you wouldn't get that effortless and lightness. So I thought, what's other solutions? So one morning, I just woke up, and I was just sorting something from my closet that was folded over, and it's like, this is it. It looked so beautiful. I just hung it in my bathroom door, and I said, this is it. So I called Christina Parsons, who was there, the assistant curator who worked with me. I called her and said, do you have that kind of chiffon dress? Can you mock up something? Because the Chloé archivist was coming to the museum that day, and we should submit that to her, because I knew you could balance the weight by folding it over, and you could pad that part of the hanger. So we did that mock-up, photographed it, and showed it to the archivist. And she said, oh, that's interesting. And she was very interested in experimenting new display system for garments. And so she tested it with a conservator in the Chloé archive, and she said, yes, let's go. So, and they look gorgeous. They're very interesting. They look almost like an art installation.
That fabulous Lagerfeld dress, the blue beaded dress with the faucets on the back, and also the Lagerfeld, the hand-painted dresses. So how many were made? Those were not ready to wear. Those were certainly couture.
So that's a very good question. That's one of the first questions I asked the archive. Unfortunately, they don't know because they don't have any economical archives. But they found out actually it really depended on which collection. And Chloé has always been in between ready-to-wear and haute couture. And with these hand-painted dresses on silk, we are the closest to couture because they're all hand-painted. And they estimated that they were made between 20 to 70 exemplars, approximately. Between 20 and 70 or 80 of each for the hand-painted dresses. But I think they're a bit isolated in the history of Chloé because they were all unique also. That's what explained there are so few of them, and it's very difficult to find because they were not made in big numbers.
Do you guys in the first row have more intel than we do?
I think you have you've shared so much intel. So thank you so much for joining us.